Picture this, a young woman in Nigeria, mocked day after day for selling nothing more than beans on a tiny street corner. People laughed at her, called her a failure, and walked past without a second thought. But one day, a billionaire stopped, tasted that same beans, and everything changed. What happened next will leave you speechless. The market was alive that morning with voices rising and falling like music, each trader calling out to buyers. Among the rows of shops and stalls, she sat quietly by her small table. Her name was Amaka. The table was old, the paint peeling, but the pot of beans resting on it gave off a warm and inviting aroma. She had been selling beans for as long as anyone could remember, spooning generous portions into bowls for those who could afford just a few coins. Children often ran past her, laughing, sometimes pointing at her with mocking words. Some women whispered as they walked by, saying how she wasted her youth on beans instead of chasing bigger dreams. Men smirked, calling her Madam Beans in tones meant to sting. She would smile faintly, hiding the ache in her chest, because she knew that if she broke down, her small world would crumble. Her beans were different. They were cooked slowly with care, seasoned in a way that made the taste linger long after the last spoonful. But the world around her was too quick to laugh and too blind to see the magic in what she served. She stayed quiet, her heart heavy but steady, because she believed that one day her story would not be the same. The sun climbed higher, and sweat glistened on her forehead. Still, she greeted every customer with warmth, even the ones who mocked her. An old man stopped by, paid her with a shaky hand, and after the first taste, his eyes lit up. He nodded slowly, almost in gratitude, and she felt a small spark of pride inside her. But the next moment, the jeers returned from a group of young men nearby, and the spark dimmed again. At home in the evening, her little sister, Adiz, would ask why she kept selling beans when people laughed at her. Amaka would stroke her hair and say, "Because this pot is our survival, and one day, it will be our blessing." Her voice carried no doubt, even though her own heart sometimes wavered. In the city, far away from that small market, a man was dining in one of the most expensive restaurants in Lagos. He was a billionaire whose name carried weight across the country. But that night, after a plate of fine dishes was placed before him, he pushed it aside with little interest. None of it satisfied him, none of it carried the comfort he longed for, though he could not quite explain why. Unaware of each other, their lives were drifting on different sides of the same story, waiting for the moment when they would finally collide. Morning came again, and the market stirred to life as if it had never rested. The clatter of wooden stalls opening, the rhythm of traders arranging their wares, and the scattered voices of buyers painted the air with noise. Amaka rose before dawn, as always, her hands working carefully over the beans that had soaked overnight. She moved with a quiet grace, adding spices the way her mother had once taught her, tasting with care until she felt the balance was perfect. She carried her pot with both strength and determination, walking the dusty road that led to the market. By the time she settled at her usual corner, the air was already filled with the smell of fried plantain, groundnut oil, and roasted corn. People hurried past, some glancing her way, most ignoring her. A group of young women, dressed neatly in uniforms on their way to work, slowed as they walked by. One of them whispered something, and the others burst into laughter. They shook their heads as if Amaka's very existence was a shameful joke. She lowered her gaze, her lips forming a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her first customer was a schoolboy, no more than 12, his uniform slightly torn, his shoes worn thin. He placed a few coins on the table. She filled his plate with beans, added a piece of fried plantain, and pushed the plate towards him. The boy's face lit up as if she had handed him gold. He ate quickly, savoring each bite, then thanked her with the sincerity only a child could carry. That moment warmed her heart, but it was fleeting, drowned out by the echo of voices mocking her again. "Imagine wasting your life like this," one man said loudly to his friend, making sure she could hear. She could be working in an office, wearing fine clothes, but no, beans is her kingdom. Laughter followed his words, sharp and cruel. Amaka kept her head down. Her hands never stopped moving as she served, her smile never fully breaking. Deep inside, however, her chest tightened with a dull ache. It wasn't easy, but she had promised herself that one day her tears would no longer fall for their words. That evening, she returned home carrying a few naira notes, her earnings for the day. Adiz met her at the door, eyes wide with questions. "Did they laugh at you again?" the little girl asked. Amaka tried to laugh, to brush it off, but Adiz knew better. She clung to her sister, whispering, "One day, they'll line up for your beans. I know it." On the other side of the city, the billionaire sat in a boardroom, surrounded by men in fine suits and women with polished nails. Papers were spread across the long table, deals worth millions being signed. Yet his mind wandered. He was tired of the life that glittered on the outside but felt hollow within. He longed for something real, something that reminded him of his childhood when meals were simple but full of love. His assistant noticed his silence, but no one dared to question him. Later that night, he dined again at his mansion. A chef had prepared an elaborate spread: steak, seafood, wine. He pushed his plate away after only 2 bites. Nothing felt right. The flavors were sharp but empty, expensive but soulless. He walked out onto his balcony, looking over the city lights, and thought of the meals his late mother used to cook, beans simmered slowly over firewood, with the aroma that carried both comfort and strength. A memory flickered in him, and for the first time in years, he felt a craving that no fine restaurant had managed to satisfy. Back in Amaka's neighborhood, the night air was heavy, but she sat outside with Adiz. They shared a small plate of beans, eating slowly, talking about dreams. Adiz spoke of wanting to go to school in the city, to become someone great. Amaka smiled, stroking her sister's hair, her own dream smaller but steady. Just enough money to keep them alive, just enough hope to keep moving forward. The stars above seemed distant, but both sisters looked at them as if they could reach out and pull down a different kind of future. Neither knew that fate had already begun weaving the thread that would tie their simple world to the billionaire's restless heart. And while the city slept, that same pot of beans sat by Amaka's side, half empty but filled with a promise she herself did not yet see. The next morning was heavier than usual. Clouds rolled across the sky as if they too carried the weight Amaka often felt in her chest. She woke before the first rooster crowed, stretched her sore arms, and made her way to the small kitchen at the back of their little house. The wooden door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and dried pepper. She rinsed the beans carefully, her hands moving in practiced motions. The water turned cloudy, and she changed it again and again until it was clear. She added onions, palm oil, and just the right measure of seasoning. The firewood beneath the pot crackled, filling the room with a comforting warmth. As the beans simmered, Amaka hummed softly, a song her mother used to sing. The melody floated gently into the stillness of dawn. By the time the sun began to rise, she balanced the heavy pot on her head with a wrapper folded into a circle for support. Adiz followed, skipping lightly beside her, though her eyes always carried the worry of someone who wished her sister's load was lighter. Together they walked toward the market, their feet tracing the familiar path through narrow streets, past houses with tin roofs and children playing barefoot in the dust. The market was alive when they arrived. Stalls overflowed with tomatoes, yams, fabrics, and second-hand clothes. Voices filled the air, bargaining, teasing, arguing. Amaka set her table in the same corner as always. She placed her pot carefully, opened the lid, and immediately, the aroma spread like a silent invitation. Customers came, but so did the mockery. A woman selling jewelry leaned over and said loudly, "Fine girl like you, wasting your beauty on beans. Who will marry you?" Her friends burst into laughter, slapping each other's arms as if the joke were the funniest thing in the world. Amaka's jaw tightened, but her face stayed calm. She scooped beans for a tired taxi driver who barely looked up from his plate. Adiz watched from behind, her little fists clenched in anger. But Amaka touched her sister's hand gently, shaking her head. She didn't want the child's heart to harden because of people's cruelty. As the hours passed, more customers came. A carpenter ate silently, nodding in satisfaction after each bite. A woman carrying a baby on her back bought a small portion, saying softly, "This is the only thing my child eats without crying." Moments like that gave Amaka strength, small lights in the shadow of ridicule. Meanwhile, far away in the city, the billionaire woke in his mansion. His night had been restless. He dreamt of his mother, her voice calling him to eat, the smell of beans pulling him from play. He woke with a memory so vivid he could almost taste it. For the first time in years, he wanted something humble, something far removed from the glitter of his world. He told his driver to cancel his morning meetings. He wanted to drive through the streets of Lagos, without escorts, without noise, just him and the city. He dressed simply, wearing a cap to hide his face. The driver obeyed without question, though he was surprised. As the car rolled past busy streets and crowded markets, the billionaire watched people move about their day. For a brief moment, he felt ordinary, and it brought him peace. They slowed near a corner where people gathered around a small table. The billionaire rolled down his window. His eyes landed on Amaka. She stood straight, sweat shining on her forehead, ladling beans into a bowl with careful hands. There was no rush in her, only patience. The smell reached him even from inside the car, and instantly, something deep in him stirred. He stepped out, ignoring the driver's hesitation. Whispers rose immediately as people recognized him, though his cap shielded him enough from direct stares. He walked to the table. Amaka looked up, her eyes meeting his briefly before dropping again. She thought he was just another customer. "How much?" he asked, his voice calm. She told him the price, her tone steady as always. He handed her money, more than enough, and waited as she served him a steaming bowl. He took the first spoonful slowly. The taste filled his mouth, rich and comforting, a taste he had not felt in years. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if savoring not just food but a piece of his past. The crowd around them fell silent, watching. Some gossiped quietly, wondering why a man dressed so well would eat from Amaka's pot. Others smirked, waiting to laugh if he spit it out. But he didn't. He kept eating, each bite slower than the last, as if he didn't want it to end. Amaka stood frozen, unsure what to think. Customers were one thing, but this man, something about him was different. Adiz tugged at her sister's wrapper, whispering, "Do you know who he is?" Amaka shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the man enjoying her beans as though it were a delicacy served in the finest restaurant. When he finished, he looked at her directly, his eyes warm, almost grateful. "This," he said softly, "is the best meal I've had in a very long time." And for the first time, the laughter of others faded completely. The market had gone quiet, every pair of eyes watching, every mocking tongue stilled. Amaka's hands trembled slightly, but her heart beat with a strength she had never felt before. Something had shifted, though she couldn't yet understand what it meant. The billionaire reached into his pocket, not for more money, but for a card. He placed it on her table without a word, then walked back to his car. Dust rose as the vehicle pulled away, leaving behind a silence so thick it almost felt sacred. Adiz grabbed the card quickly, staring at the name printed on it. Her mouth fell open, but no words came out. She looked at her sister, her eyes wide with disbelief. And Amaka, standing with her pot of beans and the eyes of the entire market on her, felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. The day after the billionaire had walked away, the market felt different, though at first glance, nothing had changed. Traders still shouted, children still ran barefoot between stalls, and the smell of roasted corn and fried fish still filled the air. But Amaka felt it in the way people glanced at her table now, some with curiosity, others with envy, and a few with genuine awe. She arrived early, as usual, carrying the same heavy pot, but her steps felt lighter, her heart brimming with a strange mix of fear and excitement. Adiz followed closely, clutching the card her sister had been given, as if it were a treasure beyond measure. The first customers came slowly, tentative as if they had heard something about the previous day. A woman approached, her eyes scanning the table with more respect than mockery. "I heard someone very important ate your beans," she said quietly. "I want to try too." Amaka smiled faintly, scooping beans into a bowl and handing it over. The woman ate slowly, savoring each bite, and nodded with a satisfied smile. Word spread quickly through the market. Traders paused in their work, whispering to each other, pointing toward Amaka's corner. The young women who had mocked her the day before now stared openly, their laughter gone, replaced by uncertain curiosity. Some tried to hide their shock behind polite nods, but Amaka didn't notice. She focused on her beans, on each customer's satisfaction, on the warmth that spread through her chest every time someone left her table with a smile. By midday, a small crowd had formed. People came from other parts of the market, drawn by rumors of a strange encounter. A man of wealth and power had eaten from a simple pot of beans and declared it the best meal of his life. Amaka moved carefully among the bowls, serving everyone with the same patience she always had. She could feel eyes on her, but she didn't falter. The teasing voices from before had vanished, replaced by whispers of admiration. Adiz could barely contain her excitement. She leaned over and whispered, "Sister, do you know what this means?" Amaka shook her head, her hands steady even as her mind raced. She wanted to hope, but she had learned the hard way not to trust in rumors or fleeting attention. In the city, the billionaire was restless. The memory of her beans lingered in his mind, stubborn and persistent. He had tried to eat breakfast, lunch, and even a late snack, but nothing satisfied him. The taste, the aroma, the simplicity, all of it haunted him in the best way. He realized he needed more. Not more wealth, not more food, not more noise, but more of that feeling, comfort, care, and authenticity. He called his assistant, a sharp young woman who rarely showed emotion. "Find her," he said quietly. "Find the woman who made those beans." She hesitated, not sure if he was joking, but the urgency in his voice left no room for doubt. She immediately began asking questions, making calls, tracking the whispers of the market through every contact she could reach. Back in the market, the day dragged on. Amaka's pot emptied slowly, people lingering over the last bowls as if they could stretch the experience a little longer. Every customer left with a smile, every satisfied word carving a small but permanent place in Amaka's heart. Yet, despite the growing crowd and sudden attention, she remained calm, her movements unhurried, her eyes gentle, as if she were the same woman who had always served beans quietly, even in the face of mockery. By late afternoon, the air had grown warmer, sticky with the humidity that clung to Lagos like a second skin. The noise of the market reached a crescendo, traders shouting their prices, children running in dizzying circles, but above it all, a quiet determination radiated from Amaka. She had no idea that far away, the billionaire had begun arranging for a driver to take him back to the market, not as a wealthy man with guards and cameras, but as someone who simply wanted more of what had touched his soul. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty paths, a small commotion stirred near the market entrance. People began to whisper, nudging each other, pointing. Amaka noticed, but continued serving. Her eyes flicked occasionally, curious but cautious. And then he appeared. No entourage, no guards, just a man in simple clothes, walking through the crowd with a calm certainty. Heads turned, jaws dropped. Some people stepped aside, unsure whether to stare or pretend they hadn't noticed. He moved directly toward Amaka, his eyes scanning her table, then resting on her face. She froze for a moment, her hand hovering above a bowl of beans. Recognition sparked, disbelief mingling with a strange excitement. He smiled faintly, extending a hand not for business, not for payment, but in acknowledgement of the simple perfection she had created. The market seemed to hold its breath. Children paused mid-laugh, traders stopped mid-sale, and the sun seemed to hang just above the horizon, as if watching this quiet collision of two worlds. He spoke softly, but the words carried across the space between them. "I need to know how you make this," he said. "Not just the beans, but how you make people feel like this is more than just food." Amaka's heart raced. The reality of the moment pressed in on her from all sides, yet she remained composed. She met his gaze, nodded slowly, and began to speak, not of recipes or money, but of care, patience, and love that went into every pot she served. And for the first time, she realized that what had been mocked, what had been dismissed, was about to become the very thing that changed everything. The market, once a place of ridicule and survival, now held a new rhythm, one that promised transformation not just for her, but for everyone who had doubted her along the way. As the sun sank lower, painting the city with a deep golden light, Amaka poured another bowl, her hands steady, her heart filled with quiet triumph. Adiz watched, eyes wide, knowing that today was only the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. The billionaire tasted the beans again, and this time, he didn't just taste them, he felt them. And in that feeling, a bridge formed between two lives, so different yet suddenly connected by something as simple, as humble, and as powerful as a pot of beans. The next morning, Amaka woke before the sun, but this time the world felt different. She moved through the small house quietly, carrying a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. Adiz, still clutching the billionaire's card, bounced around, her excitement spilling over like a river that could not be contained. Amaka poured water over the beans, washing them slowly, carefully, almost reverently. She added palm oil, chopped onions, a few secret spices she had never shared with anyone, and stirred the pot gently as it began to simmer over the firewood. Today, unlike other mornings, there was no ridicule. Whispers of the previous day had spread like wildfire. People in the neighborhood were talking, nodding, pointing in her direction. Even the market traders who had once laughed now eyed her with a mixture of caution and respect. Still, Amaka moved as she always did, steady, patient, her focus entirely on the beans and the simple joy of cooking them. When she arrived at the market, the street was already crowded. Word had traveled fast that someone important had eaten her beans, and people from other parts of Lagos had begun to come in small groups, curious and eager. Some carried small cameras or phones, snapping pictures, whispering excitedly to each other. Children peeked around corners, their eyes wide in awe. Amaka set her table carefully. She arranged the bowls in a neat line, the pot of steaming beans at the center. Adis flitted about, serving water and bread to early customers, giggling with the kind of happiness that comes when a dream feels almost real. By mid-morning, a small crowd had formed, and Amaka's heart thumped with a mixture of pride and apprehension. People began to approach cautiously, speaking politely, unsure of what to expect. A man carrying a bag of groceries asked for a bowl, and after tasting, his eyes widened. This tastes like home," he said softly. "I don't know why, but I feel calm." His words sent a warmth through Amaka's chest. Others followed. A woman in traditional attire placed an order for her children, saying that she wanted them to feel the same comfort she felt when she was young. Every bite, every nod, every smile seemed to confirm what Amaka had always known: her beans were not ordinary. They carried a memory, a comfort, a touch of care that no one had thought could come from a humble pot. Far away, the billionaire was already on the move. He had been unable to eat properly the entire morning, thinking only of her beans. Something about them had stirred something inside him, a long-forgotten sense of warmth and security that money had never been able to buy. He insisted on going to the market personally, refusing guards, ignoring calls from his office, dressed simply so he could move without attracting attention, though whispers still followed him like shadows. As he approached the market, people parted instinctively, recognizing him but unsure of what to do. His eyes scanned every stall, every table, until they landed on the small corner where Amaka stood. She was in the middle of serving, her hands steady, her gaze focused. When she noticed him, her heart skipped a beat, but she did not falter. She had learned to carry herself with dignity, no matter the circumstances. He walked directly toward her, and the market seemed to slow. Children paused mid-play, vendors froze mid-sale, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Amaka," he said softly, almost unsure if he could believe his own words. She looked up fully this time, her eyes meeting his. Recognition dawned, and she felt the strange mixture of fear and curiosity that often comes when life is about to change in ways you never imagined. "Yes," she said cautiously, "that's me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, opening it carefully. "I want to understand," he said, "how you do this. How your beans, they are not just food. They make people feel something. I want to help you bring this to more people, but I need you to trust me." Amaka's breath caught. She had never imagined her life extending beyond the market, never dreamed that someone of his wealth and influence would stand before her, not to belittle her, not to laugh, but to offer a chance that could change everything. She felt a wave of disbelief, followed by cautious hope. I don't know," she whispered. "I've never left the market like this before. My beans, they belong here, with people I know, with people who need them every day." He smiled, gentle and understanding. "I'm not asking to take them away. I'm asking to give them to more people who need exactly what you make. Your care, your patience, it's rare. I can help, but I need you to show me." The market around them seemed almost surreal. Traders and customers alike watched silently, sensing the gravity of the moment. Children peeked through gaps between legs, whispering excitedly. Adis clutched her sister's hand, wide-eyed, as if the world itself had suddenly opened a door for them that had long been closed. Amaka took a deep breath, looking down at her pot of beans. The aroma rose in gentle waves, carrying with it years of effort, dreams, and quiet resilience. She looked back at the man, then at the faces of the people around her, and felt a courage she had never known before. "Okay," she said finally. I'll trust you. But you have to promise me something. No shortcuts, no changing the heart of it. My beans, they are more than food. They are hope. He nodded solemnly. I promise. I will honor them, and I will honor you. For a long moment, the market seemed suspended in time. And then, as if on cue, the first customers began to clap softly, their appreciation spreading until the small crowd erupted in murmurs of approval. Amaka's hands trembled slightly as she returned to her pot, scooping beans once more, feeling the taste of possibility rise with each serving. That afternoon, word began to spread across the city. Messages traveled quickly, carried by curious traders, school children, and street vendors. Soon, people were coming from far-off neighborhoods, seeking the simple warmth of her beans. And through it all, Amaka moved steadily, serving each person with care, never letting the attention overwhelm her, never letting the mockery of the past dim the quiet pride that now glowed within her. By evening, the pot was almost empty. She sat for a moment, exhausted but elated, watching the sunset spill warm colors across the streets of Lagos. Adiz leaned against her, whispering, "Sister, this is just the beginning, isn't it?" Amaka nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon, knowing in her heart that the life they had once dreamed of, hidden behind laughter and ridicule, was finally starting to unfold before them. And far away, the billionaire, seated in his simple car outside the market, watched her with quiet admiration. He knew, without a doubt, that what had begun here that morning with a simple bowl of beans would ripple far beyond this market, far beyond Lagos, and perhaps even beyond what either of them could yet imagine. The morning arrived like a whisper, soft and tentative, but for Amaka, it carried the weight of change. The city seemed alive in a way it had never been before, as though Lagos itself had sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding in one of its smallest corners. She rose before dawn, her movements deliberate and calm, though her mind raced with questions and possibilities. Adiz bounded around the small house, her energy uncontainable, her eyes sparkling with the same excitement that had gripped them both since the appearance of the billionaire. Amaka's hands worked with practiced precision, rinsing and sorting the beans, checking each one carefully. She soaked them overnight, just as she always had, stirring in spices and oil, tasting carefully as they simmered over the firewood. The aroma began to fill the room, wrapping around her like a familiar, comforting blanket. Adiz watched in fascination, asking question after question about the spices, the timing, the little tricks Amaka had learned from years of experience. When they stepped outside, the streets were already buzzing. People had begun to gather earlier than usual, having heard through whispers, messages, and word of mouth that the woman whose beans had captured the attention of one of the city's most powerful men would be at her table again. Traders paused to glance at Amaka as she walked toward her usual spot, their expressions a mixture of respect, curiosity, and disbelief. Setting her table, she felt a strange nervousness that she had never experienced before. This was no longer just about survival, it was about possibility. She arranged her bowls, the pot steaming invitingly at the center, and began to serve the first few customers with her usual care. Each bite, each smile, each satisfied nod from the people around her reinforced the quiet truth she had always known. Her beans were more than food, they were connection, comfort, and something deeply human that could not be measured in money. As the morning progressed, the crowd grew. People came from neighboring streets and far-off areas, drawn by the story that had spread like wildfire. The billionaire had eaten her beans and declared them the best meal of his life. Children ran ahead to announce her arrival to friends, and mothers guided their families carefully through the crowd, eager for the warmth and satisfaction that Amaka's beans promised. She moved through the crowd steadily, scooping beans into bowls, adding fried plantain, serving with a quiet dignity that left an impression on everyone who watched. Even those who had mocked her before now looked on in awe, uncertain how to reconcile their disbelief with the reality in front of them. By mid-morning, the billionaire himself appeared, stepping lightly out of the car he had insisted on driving himself. He avoided the glare of the cameras and the gossiping crowd, moving directly toward Amaka with a calm, almost reverent focus. Her eyes met his briefly, and she saw something in his gaze, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and recognition. He carried nothing with him this time, no money, no card, only a quiet intent to witness her work and understand what had made the beans so unforgettable. "Amaka," he said softly as he approached, his voice carrying over the hum of the market, "I want to learn. Not just how to cook the beans, but how to make people feel what you make them feel when they eat them." She paused, her hands steady but her heart racing. "It's not about the recipe," she said carefully, choosing her words. "It's about care, patience, knowing the people you're feeding. The beans, they carry love. That's what makes them taste like something more." The billionaire nodded, absorbing her words. He had traveled the world, tasted the most expensive dishes, met the most powerful chefs, yet never had he felt such a simple meal carry so much meaning. "Then teach me," he said. "Let me see how you do it, every step." Amaka hesitated, the enormity of the moment pressing on her. She thought of the years she had spent in the market, the jeers, the ridicule, the endless days of hard work that had seemed unnoticed and thankless. But she also thought of Adiz, of the pride in her little sister's eyes, of the small but profound joy she felt whenever someone left her table satisfied. She realized then that this was the moment she had been waiting for, even if she hadn't known it. "All right," she said finally, a quiet strength in her voice. "But you must follow exactly. No shortcuts. No rushing. You must care as much as I do." He agreed immediately, and for the next hour, Amaka guided him through the process. She showed him how to sort the beans, how to soak them, how to add spices at just the right time, how to stir slowly and mindfully. He watched every move with intense focus, asking questions not out of doubt, but out of genuine curiosity and reverence. The crowd watched in amazement. Some whispered to each other, some recorded videos, some simply stared, trying to take in what was happening. The billionaire, a man who could have bought any restaurant or hired any chef, was kneeling slightly over a pot of beans in the market, learning from a woman who had once been mocked. And Amaka, once a figure of ridicule, now held the attention and respect of everyone around her, including the city's wealthiest man. By midday, a new rhythm had settled over the market. Amaka moved with her usual grace, serving bowls of beans, while the billionaire, guided by her hands, began to replicate what she had shown him. He made mistakes, but she corrected him gently, never scolding, only demonstrating, encouraging. Each mistake became a lesson, each lesson a bridge between their worlds. Adiz could hardly contain her excitement. She ran around fetching ingredients, carrying bowls, and watching her sister teach a man who had once seemed untouchable. "Sister," she whispered repeatedly, "he's learning from you. They're all learning from you." As the sun climbed higher, the aroma of the beans spread farther than ever before, reaching beyond the market, into the nearby streets and alleyways, drawing more people toward the small table where something extraordinary was happening. Even vendors who had once been competitors paused, watching quietly, realizing that they were witnessing the birth of something that could change the way people thought about food, care, and community. By evening, the pot was almost empty, but the energy in the market had transformed completely. What had once been a place of mockery and struggle had become a place of fascination and respect. People lingered, not just for the food, but to witness the story unfolding, to feel part of something bigger than themselves. Amaka sat for a moment, exhausted but exhilarated. She looked at Adiz, who was bouncing with uncontained excitement, and then at the billionaire, who nodded at her with a quiet, profound respect. She realized that her world had shifted in a single day, not because of money, or fame, or luck, but because she had stayed true to herself, to her craft, and to the care she poured into something as simple as a pot of beans. And as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in deep, golden hues, Amaka felt a deep, quiet certainty. This was only the beginning. The market, the city, even the world beyond, would soon know the story of the woman who turned beans into magic, who transformed ridicule into respect, and who had reminded everyone watching that love, care, and persistence could change lives in ways no wealth ever could. The billionaire stayed until the last light faded, savoring each moment, each taste, each lesson. And as he drove away that night, he carried more than the memory of the beans. He carried the understanding that something humble, simple, and real could touch hearts in ways no grandeur ever could, and that Amaka's world, once small and overlooked, had just begun to stretch far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The morning arrived with a quiet intensity, like the world itself was holding its breath. Amaka rose before dawn, as usual, but there was a difference this day. She moved through the small house with a heightened sense of purpose, a gentle energy that seemed to ripple through every corner. Adiz bounced around, practically vibrating with excitement, clutching the notebook the billionaire had given them, filled with scribbled notes and ideas. Amaka went straight to the kitchen, setting the beans to soak with meticulous care. Each bean seemed to carry the weight of her dreams now, more than just nourishment. It was hope, resilience, and promise packed into every small, hard shell. She added her spices slowly, tasting and adjusting, her hands steady but her heart fluttering with the anticipation of what was to come. When she arrived at the market, the streets were already alive. Traders had begun setting up earlier than usual, whispers spreading about her growing fame. People were arriving not just to eat her beans, but to witness her teach, to see her transform a humble pot of beans into something extraordinary. Her usual corner was slowly becoming a destination, a small hub of fascination and admiration amidst the chaos of the market. Amaka set her table, carefully arranging bowls and adding small touches of care that she had learned over years of patience. Adiz helped with water and bread, but mostly, she stood wide-eyed, watching as her sister's presence seemed to command respect without even trying. By mid-morning, the crowd had grown large. People from neighboring streets, from further across Lagos, and even curious onlookers from distant neighborhoods were gathering, their eyes full of anticipation. They whispered excitedly among themselves, wondering what was happening, drawn by the story of the billionaire who had eaten her beans and the woman who had captured his attention. The billionaire arrived not long after, quietly stepping out of his car, dressed simply but with an air of calm authority. He moved directly toward Amaka, ignoring the murmuring crowd and cameras, as if he alone could see the importance of this moment. Amaka's gaze met his briefly, her heart skipping a beat, but she maintained her calm, steady hands, ready to continue her work. "I want to learn more today," he said, softly, yet firmly. "Not just the beans, but everything that makes them special." Amaka nodded. "It's not about the ingredients," she said. "It's about care, patience, and understanding the people you serve. You have to feel what they need, not just feed them. The beans are just part of it." He listened carefully, leaning slightly over the table, observing her every move. She showed him how to sort the beans, how to soak them to the perfect softness, how to cook them slowly so the flavors blended without rushing. She demonstrated how to balance spices carefully, how to stir gently, and how to serve with both dignity and warmth. The market watched in awe. Traders paused, children stopped mid-play, and even those who had once mocked her could not look away. People were witnessing something rare, a man of immense wealth and power humbly learning from someone who had once been dismissed, someone whose hands and heart had created magic from something as ordinary as beans. Hours passed, but the process was meticulous, deliberate, and intimate. The billionaire made mistakes, sometimes adding too much palm oil, sometimes stirring too quickly, but Amaka corrected him gently, showing rather than scolding, encouraging rather than judging. Every correction was a lesson, every lesson a bridge between their worlds. Adiz flitted around the table, carrying bowls, handing over water, and marveling at the sight of her sister teaching someone so important. She whispered repeatedly, "Sister, this is amazing. Everyone is watching you." By midday, a rhythm had settled over the market. Amaka moved gracefully, serving bowls of beans, while the billionaire followed her instructions, learning not just the steps but the patience and care that made the food remarkable. The crowd, initially curious, became mesmerized. They whispered to each other about the magic unfolding, about how someone so humble could hold such power through her craft, her patience, and her heart. As the sun climbed high in the sky, the aroma of the beans spread far beyond the market, drifting through the streets and alleys, pulling more people toward the small table where Amaka worked. Mothers led children, men carried bags to share the food with families, and even neighboring vendors paused in astonishment, realizing that they were witnessing the birth of something far greater than themselves. By late afternoon, the pot was nearly empty. Amaka sat for a moment, exhaustion washing over her, but it was a sweet exhaustion, filled with satisfaction and a quiet pride. She looked at Adiz, whose face was glowing with excitement and awe, and then at the billionaire, who gave her a small, respectful nod. "You've changed the way I see food, and more importantly, the way I see people," he said quietly. "I've traveled the world, tasted the most expensive dishes, but nothing has ever carried what your beans carry, the care, the warmth, the honesty. I want to help you share this with more people, but only if it's on your terms." Amaka's heart swelled. She realized that everything she had endured, the mockery, the long days, the struggle to survive, had prepared her for this moment. The market, once a place of ridicule, had become the stage for her triumph. The simple pot of beans, once overlooked, had become a symbol of persistence, love, and quiet strength. "Then let's do it together," she said, her voice steady, filled with conviction. But it must always stay real. No shortcuts. No losing the heart of it. The beans are more than food, they are hope. He nodded solemnly, understanding completely. The market seemed to hum around them, the air alive with anticipation and energy. Children whispered to each other, traders smiled in disbelief, and those who had once doubted her now watched with awe, realizing that they were witnessing the start of something extraordinary. As the sun dipped low, casting long, golden shadows across the streets of Lagos, Amaka scooped the last bowls of beans, each one a quiet triumph. Adiz leaned against her, whispering in wonder, "Sister, this is bigger than we ever imagined." Amaka smiled softly, her heart full. She realized that this day, like the days before it, was not just about beans. It was about transformation, about courage, and about the power of care and persistence. And as the billionaire drove away that evening, carrying not just the taste of beans but the understanding of something profound, she knew without a doubt that the world beyond the market had already begun to change. Her life, once small and overlooked, was stretching into something vast and unimaginable. And in that stretch, in the quiet confidence of her heart, Amaka understood that her story, built from sweat, patience, and love, was only just beginning. The morning arrived quieter than usual, though there was a sense of anticipation that hung in the air like electricity. Amaka woke before dawn, but this time the weight of expectation was different. She moved through the small house, careful not to wake Adiz too early, but her own mind was alive with possibilities. The notebook from the billionaire lay on the small wooden table, filled with scribbles and sketches, plans for something bigger than either of them had imagined. Amaka began her day as she always did, washing the beans carefully, sorting them with precision, and adding spices with the practiced patience that had defined her craft for so many years. Adiz, as usual, hovered nearby, asking a million questions, excited beyond measure. "Sister, today feels different, doesn't it?" she whispered. Amaka smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, it does. But we stay focused. Every pot matters." When they stepped outside, the market already pulsed with life. Traders set up their stalls, children ran past with bread in hand, and the aroma of fresh food began to rise from every corner. But today, something had changed. People moved with purpose toward Amaka's corner. Her table, once small and overlooked, had become a center of attention. Her beans, her craft, had become legendary overnight. As Amaka arranged her bowls and lifted the lid from her steaming pot, the crowd around her seemed to swell instinctively. People came from all over Lagos and even from neighborhoods further away. Some brought families, some came alone, and others came simply to witness the woman who had turned humble beans into something extraordinary. Even traders who had once mocked her now stood quietly, observing, whispering, and nodding in respect. The billionaire arrived mid-morning, quietly, without the fanfare of cameras or guards. His presence alone caused a ripple through the crowd. He moved directly toward Amaka, eyes calm but intense, carrying the curiosity and reverence that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "Amaka," he said softly, "I've been thinking. You've shown me how to cook the beans, how to care for them, and how to care for the people who eat them. But I want to go further. I want to help you share this, not just in Lagos, but beyond, in a way that respects the love and effort you put into every pot." Amaka paused, her hands stilling over the steaming beans. She looked at him, taking in the sincerity in his eyes. "It's not about money," she said slowly. "It's about the care, the patience, the heart. If that is lost, then the beans are nothing." He nodded. "I understand. I want it to stay exactly as you make it, but with the chance for more people to experience it. Not just taste it, but feel it. Can you trust me?" Amaka's chest tightened. The years of ridicule, struggle, and late nights had all led to this moment. She looked at Adiz, whose small face was filled with hope and excitement, and then back at the man standing before her. Slowly, she nodded. "I will trust you. But it must remain real. Every pot, every bowl, every taste. Nothing less." For the rest of the day, the market became a stage for an extraordinary collaboration. Amaka guided the billionaire through each step, showing him not just the cooking, but the philosophy behind it, the careful selection of beans, the patience required to simmer them perfectly, the gentle stirring, the timing of each spice, and above all, the attention to the people who would eat them. He made mistakes, of course, but she corrected him gently, demonstrating, explaining, and sometimes laughing at his fumbling attempts. The crowd watched in awe, children pressed closer, vendors paused mid-sale, and even strangers who had only come to taste her beans lingered to observe. It was as if the entire market had become a classroom, and the lesson was far greater than cooking. It was about persistence, patience, care, and the quiet power of love expressed through simple acts. By afternoon, more people had arrived than Amaka had ever seen. She served bowls tirelessly, sweat glistening on her forehead, her hands steady, her heart alive with a joy that was both quiet and immense. Adiz moved alongside her, helping where she could, eyes shining as she carried small bowls to customers, whispered words of encouragement to them, and marveled at the scene unfolding before her. The billionaire stood beside her now, no longer awkward or uncertain, but engaged fully, following her lead, asking questions, observing the reactions of each person who tasted the beans. He seemed almost transformed himself, softened by the experience, learning not just to cook, but to connect, to understand, to honor the effort and care that went into something so humble yet so powerful. As the sun dipped low, the market was bathed in golden light. People lingered, savoring the last bowls, talking quietly, sharing the story of the woman who had turned beans into more than food, who had taken ridicule and transformed it into respect, into admiration, into awe. Amaka's table was nearly empty, but the energy that surrounded her seemed limitless. She finally took a moment to sit, wiping her brow, catching her breath, and looking at Adiz. "Do you see?" she whispered. "All the days we struggled, all the laughter and mockery, it led us here. Not by chance, but by persistence." Adiz hugged her tightly. "Sister, I knew this would happen. I just didn't know it would be like this." The billionaire approached, holding out his hand, not in a gesture of business, but in one of respect and gratitude. "You've shown me more than I could have imagined," he said softly. "Not just about food, but about life, care, and love. I am honored to have learned from you, and I hope to continue learning." Amaka took his hand, feeling the warmth and sincerity in the gesture. "Then we move forward," she said. "Together. But always with care. Always with heart." The market, once a place of ridicule, had become a place of transformation, of recognition, of possibility. The laughter that once hurt her now seemed distant, irrelevant, replaced by something far greater: respect, admiration, and hope. As evening settled and the streets grew quieter, Amaka and Adiz walked home, their hearts full, their minds alive with dreams of the future. They had no idea how far this path would take them, but one thing was certain: the beans, humble and simple, had become the bridge to a life beyond anything they had ever imagined. And far away, in his car, the billionaire watched the city lights of Lagos twinkle, thinking of her beans, thinking of her patience, thinking of the quiet strength that had transformed something ordinary into something extraordinary. He knew that this was only the beginning, and that together, they would write a story that would touch countless lives, one pot of beans at a time. The journey had started with ridicule, but it would continue with triumph, love, and the undeniable proof that persistence, care, and heart could change the world in ways no one could predict. And as Amaka closed the door behind them that night, the scent of simmered beans lingering in the house, she felt the quiet thrill of knowing that the life she had once dreamed of, hidden behind mockery and struggle, had finally arrived. And that's how Amaka's simple pot of beans turned laughter and doubt into respect, opportunity, and a story that reminds us all: persistence, care, and heart can change a life in ways we never imagine. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next incredible tale. We'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment telling us which country you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Your story is part of ours, and we can't wait to read every one of them.